Hi, this is my review of Tales of the Empowered. Tales of the Empowered contains a number of stories that show you the events, the types of battles and conflicts, the drama, and the everyday living of the characters that exist in the universe of Era the Empowered, a superhero role-playing game. If you haven't seen my review of the player's guide for Era the Empowered, I recommend that you check out the link in the description below. Now let's talk about the quality of the PDF. The organization and the writing is good. This reads a bit like a light novel. You have different paragraphs, somewhat short paragraphs, so it's quite easy to breeze through the entire thing. This is about 74 pages of stories. The document is fully bookmarked, so it's going to be quite easy for you to navigate the entire PDF. It doesn't have illustrations, that is besides the front cover and the back cover. But the graphic design is great, just like the other Era the Empowered book. So the quality overall is great. However, I did find a couple of errors, but they were quite small. Now let's talk about the contents. This is going to be a spoiler-free review. I want you to enjoy the surprises that the stories will present as you dive into the world of Era the Empowered. So I'm going to handle things somewhat in an ambiguous way and somewhat loosely as well. You have a number of events that happened during different months from year 1 to year 4. That is, from the very first moment that powers suddenly started to appear in the world, and there is not a specific source to these powers. It seems like the world suddenly became a sort of like breeding ground for supernatural, superheroic, and extraordinary abilities, powers, and skills to suddenly come out of nowhere. But you can find some causes or reasons within the fiction as to why this happened. That is, the different heroes and villains, and even anti-heroes and anti-villains, I guess you could say, have their powers from different sources. Some of them consider their powers to be some sort of divine gift. Others have their powers because of some sort of failed weird science experiment. That is, an experiment gone wrong or perhaps gone right. Some others have inherited their powers from some sort of artifact or heirloom. Some others have obtained their powers because of their connection with alien energies or technology. There's also really advanced technology that has given different people in the world the means to become empowered themselves. You even have some aliens in the setting. So there's a lot of variety when it comes to the powers, that is, to the origin of the different characters' extraordinary abilities. It's somewhat difficult to define exactly the mood of Era the Empowered, and I think this is great to give a certain distinction to the entire setting. Sometimes you're reading these stories and you get a sort of like people with superpowers type of feel. That is, you see people with their own flaws, their defects, their quirks, and they suddenly became invested or empowered with some sort of special skill, ability, extraordinary capacity, and they try to use it for good or for evil, or just to get by at times. And they still have many issues to deal with, that is, with their own personalities and also with other people that they interact with. But other times, you see some episodes that feel in the classic model of the costumed hero, saying those one-liners that fit the situation, being quite smart and witty in the use of abilities and ways to overcome obstacles and solve problems. And other times the setting feels somewhat comedic, and yet other times it feels a bit perhaps on the Frank Miller style of things. Things turn somewhat dark. There are some really violent uses for superpowers, and I think that adds a bit to the realism within the fiction of the setting of Era the Empowered. That is, you're rarely going to find moments in which the different powers are going to be used in a somewhat moderate or lukewarm way. That is, if a character has the ability to magnify the heat of the sun, he's going to use that against his targets, inflicting great pain, even burning them alive. There are some really gruesome powers. This is a violent world at times, and you can be sure that the different heroes and villains will use all of their powers in different creative ways, and they will not hold back if the situation needs it. There are also many different examples of different tiers or levels of power. You can see some heroes that are more on the street level side of things, and some others that have powers that feel more universal, even demigod-like. Something that I really like is that they express really well the concept of responsibility when using your powers. You can see how different heroes may look at a situation, and they have to be quite perceptive about many things. Sometimes their targets could seem like villains, but they are actually heroes as well, or anti-heroes. Other times they have these evildoers doing some really questionable things, and because the hero considers that perhaps this person made some sort of mistake, that there is still some hope, they actually become somewhat merciful when neutralizing the threat. And I think that's a really good way of showing you the difficulties of having such great power. You know, the old, with great power comes great responsibility. Some villains do deserve to be punished, and the heroes will do it quite severely, but there's also the risk of making a mistake. So it's very important for a hero to gauge the situation, to see the potential short-term or even long-term effects of any decisions that they make. So that's part of being a hero, or perhaps even a villain if you're going to further some type of evil agenda. Now, when it comes to anti-heroes and anti-villains, you're going to find a lot of them here in these stories. You're going to see heroes that are quite controversial in the ways that they handle things. You're going to see villains that belong to different evil organizations or criminal syndicates, and however they have like a soft spot for something or someone, and they will do heroic acts to protect that certain place or person. And when it comes to the portrayal of alien intelligence, I think Ed Jowett is becoming... I don't know if Ed Jowett wrote that particular story, because there are different authors participating in this collection of stories, but it shows that the Shades of Vengeance team has experience working with expressing an alien's mindset, particularly because of their work on Era, the Consortium. And if you haven't seen my review of that role-playing game, I'm going to put the link in the description below. I also recommend that you check that out, because here you see how the aliens take a look at the human species as a whole and consider them somewhat primitive. Other aliens just do not care, and they're just trying to get by or follow their own, sometimes instincts, sometimes their own plans. You're going to see a variety of settings and places in which the action takes place. I think the battle descriptions are pretty awesome in general. I do have some criticisms when it comes to 2 or 3 of the stories, but I will save that for the end of this review, for the conclusion, so I can approach that criticism a bit more thoroughly. But the battles are pretty awesome. You see, as I was telling you, the creative use of powers, sometimes of using the strength of your foe against the foe itself. I think you will find a few characters that are going to be your favorite characters. One of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character, is probably Martian Pants Man. Martian Pants Man, in my opinion, is probably the current greatest icon of Era the Empowered, of the type of hero that is presented here. Because you have this person with pants that have been granted incredible powers because of interaction with alien energies, and he is probably one of the most powerful heroes. However, his pants are quite unpredictable. Think a bit like in the old Dungeons and Dragons cartoon of Presto the Magician, that suddenly pulls something out of his hat, but sometimes it's not that useful. he has that sort of quirk to him. But when he actually gets that up and running, he's probably one of the most powerful heroes. And he also has this, because he's a guy who loves to drink, he's almost always like easygoing. Not all of guys who enjoy their drinks are like that, but he's sort of like the jolly fellow. He seems to approach life in a somewhat relaxed way, although he still has that sense of justice. Even though he seems like some guy that doesn't care about anything but his next drink, you can see that he's actually actively looking to do good things in the world and fighting any foe, even though that foe seems incredibly strong or even superior to him. I also like it that they can switch quite smoothly between, as I was saying, comedy and drama, or even tragedy. Some of these so-called heroes or so-called villains, they are not mentally prepared to wield different powers. Sometimes these powers were pushed onto them, and some other times they took that power and tried to use it for some greater purpose, but they really do not have the maturity, I would say, to make the right judgment calls. And in contrast, there are some characters that seem to be born for the role that they were given, or the role that they even took for themselves. So let me tell you what I think of Tales of the Empowered. First, my only criticism when it comes to the content. Well, the criticism is actually two things, and they could be somewhat subjective. One, in 2 or 3 of the stories, I felt like those stories were a bit pointless. They weren't bad stories, but they felt so so bland, so average when compared to the rest of the stories. You see these heroes and villains using their powers, but I wasn't impressed with the way that they handled the situation. They just like, let's say, hero encounters a villain. The villain was doing some bad stuff. The hero outsmarts the villain in some cliched way, and that's the end of the story. So, but you have seen this many times. It has that sort of like Saturday morning cartoon feel to it, but without being too self-conscious of itself, to a point that you get fun out of the absurdity of the situation. It feels more like it just doesn't get beyond being average. It doesn't get too exciting. It doesn't showcase the particular things of the setting of Era the Empowered that make it stand out from other settings or role-playing games. And my other criticism is that I think that they used sort of like school or college setting a bit too much. I think there were a few stories that used that setting more than other types of environments. I think it's great that they included that setting because maybe someone wants to play that type of campaign if they are playing the Era the Empowered RPG. They want to portray that struggle or difficulty when students are trying to handle their lives in school, college, etc., and they try to still save the world somehow. But I think that they overuse that configuration for scenes a bit more than needed. So those are my only criticisms. But as I was saying, that's quite subjective. Maybe someone is like, oh, I wanted more school examples, or how heroes and villains interact with those institutions. Or maybe the stories that I tell you that I felt a bit too bland or average for me, maybe you will actually like them. But still, I must mention those criticisms. Now I'm going to talk about what I like of Tales of the Empowered. Well, everything that I talked about in the content, they express the setting of Era the Empowered perfectly. There are many awesome heroes and villains despite their flaws and defects. That is their way that they have to deal with personal issues and even family issues, or just the world around them. They still try to do the best that they can in their respective good and evil plans. You feel that there is a very strong cosmic duality in Tales of the Empowered. Even those characters that try to stand aside from the main conflict, they somehow get pulled to one side or the other. I think there will be 3 types of people that will enjoy this collection of stories quite a bit. The first type is someone who enjoys superhero fiction. and he doesn't mind having short stories that have no clear beginning and no clear end. That is, you do not get the origins for all of the heroes and villains. You do have hints for all of them as to how they got their powers, maybe some more than others, and the stories do not have a conclusion. They always feel like it's just the start of a great adventure. If you like those type of superhero and supervillain stories, I think you will appreciate this Tales of the Empowered book. The other type of person that could enjoy this is a player that is going to be creating a character for the era the Empowered RPG. You're going to get a lot of examples of the type of people, of heroes, villains, anti-heroes, anti-villains that exist in this setting. It will give you some ideas as to the type of powers that your character can use. So I think that you will find these tales quite valuable. And the other type of player is the game master himself. There's a lot of material for world building in this collection of stories, and you could build adventures and campaigns around the different events and conflicts throughout the months and the years. I also really liked it that they try to cover the major events of the timeline. That is the sudden mass appearance of different powers, the conflict with the Atlanteans, the conflict with the Guild of Assassins, the general clash between heroes and villains. However, if there was a part that was somehow undercovered in Tales of the Empowered, is the main war against that alien entity that Harbinger was trying to prepare the world to fight against, that is just briefly approached in the last story. So considering all of that, I highly recommend Tales of the Empowered if you're just looking to enjoy some superhero and supervillain fiction. If you want some inspirational material for your Era the Empowered sessions and campaigns, you should get this Tales of the Empowered collection of stories. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know, and expect more Era system related content in my channel. See you later.